Welcome to Easily Entertained. My name is Bryson Olson, and here we talk about all the good things of entertainment. So now, the Oscars are coming up, and I don't really care for the Oscars. I don't really care for movie award shows in general. I think they're kind of dumb, usually rigged, and kind of just like, meh, who cares? Like, great if movies get recognition that they deserve, but also I feel like sometimes it's like dumb the movies that get recognition while others don't. But when I heard about this one movie, it's called Flow, which was not only the winner of Best Animated Picture at the Golden Globes, but it was also a champion in some other areas, like using a free animation software that you yourself and I myself can use at any time. It was with a small international team and an interesting story. I couldn't just not talk about it, so let's get started. Okay, so the story of Flow, if you haven't heard of it or haven't seen it yet, which is not surprising because I believe it only showed at some festivals last year, and I don't think it really had a big picture released. I heard about it, but only watched it recently because I rented it on Apple TV. So you may not know much about it either, and so that's okay. The story of Flow is you follow this cat in a not necessarily post-apocalyptic world, but there's no humans around. Humans don't exist in this world, and a massive flood comes. So this cat has to make it out of this flood. It gets on a boat and meets up with some other creatures like a capybara, a golden retriever, a lemur, and some kind of bird. I can't remember what kind, but anyways, they're all having to survive this flood, and so you're kind of going through the story with that one simple premise in mind, and kind of keeping with the simplicity. It is a dialogueless film. There is no speaking. It is only the animal sounds, the sounds of nature, the soundtrack. There's no audible voices from anything. No humans, it's just animals, which I think kind of worked in its favor of wanting to win Best Animated Feature because it could transcend language. It didn't matter that it was an international film. It could go beyond that. But the story itself it is interesting. It's investing. All these characters, which are all just animals, act like animals while also having their own character to them. The cat is like a cat, pretty skittish and independent and not very trusting all the time, but as it spends its time around the other characters, it does tend to get a little bit more comfortable and even protective of the characters it has spent so much time with. And that's a great part about it because they're so connected. It is like watching a normal movie while also not. Like, you don't have to have the humans to have that connection between characters, and I love that about Flow, is that it tells such a simple story. We don't know why the world is flooding. We don't know why these characters in specific, we don't know why they're getting along and why some of them act in almost altruistic ways. It is just because. And sometimes we need a story like that where things happen just because. You don't have to know all the little details about why something is happening. It just is. And we're going to talk a little bit about the reasoning behind the story in a little bit, but I like how simple the story is and almost straightforward, because I think a lot of times things are trying to go too far or they're doing too little. This one I feel like hits just that perfect middle ground of it tells a good story while not being too simple. I almost think of kids cartoons, so not like a Pixar movie, which is usually meant for halfway, where there's some adult stuff and some kid stuff, whereas kids is specifically for children, and then you have adult stuff obviously for adults. This one kind of sits in that Pixar range, while also, because of its like nature, it is also kind of really friendly for kids, and it's super easy to follow for a child. Like, a child doesn't have to hear any dialogue, and they can understand, oh, this cat doesn't really care to be around dogs. It is very afraid of certain things. It doesn't like water. These birds are good. These birds are not. Like, it's very much that show don't tell rule that I love in movies. And I think that's another part of like the silentness of it, is that it just allows them to do that show don't tell so much. You can see that this world has been overtaken by nature. You can see that humans are not around. Like, obviously they're not in the movie, but you can see it's kind of like been a while since humans have been around. The boat that they use is kind of worn down. The paint has been stripping for a long time. It is showing all of these things within its story while not telling us. You know, the show don't tell rule. I don't know why I had to word it that way. From some people, it's what they expected the wild robot to be. And while I don't agree 100%, I understand where that criticism comes from. Because the first trailer that I saw for The Wild Robot made it look like a movie without dialogue. And like, The Wild Robot was still fantastic. It was probably my favorite movie of 2024 by far. It's like way up there in my list of movies, period, now. But I was hoping that we would get more of that dialogue-less film. And this one was. And because they're both like reconnecting with nature in a way, that's almost kind of where I can see the comparison coming through. But they really are entirely different stories, but I understand where these things are kind of coming through. And I don't know. I thought it was great. I thought the story was fantastic. And there's a big meaning behind the story, which I think is what we'll talk about next. So the logic behind the story of Flow is teamwork. And the way I described the story previous, that may seem kind of obvious, but it goes a little bit deeper than just the surface level. So obviously in the story, all these animals that are in this boat together, they gotta learn to work together and be able to make it out. You know, they gotta make it out of the flood, which eventually, I didn't really talk about this in the story portion, but the world cracks open. There's like an earthquake, it splits things apart, and then the flood goes away. But anyways, so the characters have to learn about teamwork. And the director, his name's Gintz Zilbalodis, which I believe he's from Latvia. This was his first project where he had to work with a team, like a bigger team. I think he's worked on some projects with like small teams, and this team was not like huge. It's not like a Pixar level team where there's hundreds of people. It was like between like 20 and 30 people, I believe, which is like not a big team, but that's a lot of people to manage as a director still. And this was his first time having to work with such a big team. Usually he did things by himself. He did it with a few other people, but never a team as big as this. So he had to learn to work with a team. And the team was scattered all across Europe. So they all had to learn how to work remotely together. And it was all with software Blender 3D, a free software that you could download right now and use yourself, which is awesome that this feature-winning movie was made with something that you or I could get access to really easily. And we're going to talk about that part in a little bit as well. But anyways, the teamwork behind this was a huge motivation for the story of Flow. Gintz says in one of his interviews is that because of the nature of the project. That's what he wanted the story to be. It was like his own personal project. He was very much like the cat, and you're following his perspective of having to learn to work with new people, having to work with, new characters. In the movie, it's new animals, but it is very much a reflection of him, and I feel like it shows beautifully because every character is different, just like every person in real life is different. There are things that are challenging to overcome, things that are easier to overcome. I don't know entirely the production workflow that happened and, how people got along and whatever, especially because it was more remote. But say this is probably a good example of something that could have happened in their production. In the movie, I'm going to think of like two or three different characters. So you have the cat, you have the dog, you have a bird, and you have a capybara. And the dog and a capybara want to go and save these other dogs that the golden retriever was once part of as a group. And the dogs are stranded. So the capybara, being like kind of an altruistic character, wants the bird to steer the boat towards them, but it's not doing it. But the cat comes in and is like, yeah, let's go do it. But earlier in the movie, the cat sided with the bird on certain things. So the bird kind of feels betrayed when the cat goes against its own decision, which is like, I know I'm explaining it in the most nebulous, crude way possible. It makes sense watching it and understanding now how the theme of teamwork came about for the director. It just makes a lot of sense. It is something that maybe it was his experience on this, it was his experience in something else as a team, whatever. It makes a lot of sense. You can see the parallels within it, and I think that adds to the story. Had I known that before watching Flow, would I have liked it even more? Probably. But even finding that out afterwards, I think it's still great because you can, like, I can look back on Flow, I could go back and rewatch it if I wanted to, and I can just see those little moments where you're like, yeah, I could have experienced something like this before, or they could have experienced something like this before. And having them not be humans, I think lets you tell the essence of that theme so much more, because it doesn't have to be the exact situation. Because as humans, we can connect with other humans perhaps a little bit easier, but that also means it ends up dwelling into that tell a little bit more than showing. And so using animal characters just lets you focus so much more on it. It's like, okay, let's actually show a creature that is usually independent struggle to work with other people. And that, like, even to me, I can connect with that a lot because I feel like in my own thing, like take this podcast, for example, I rarely ever do it with other people now. I used to, like, for a brief period, I did it with my old roommate, Cormac. But then even while we were living together, I eventually moved back to doing it by myself, which was not like a bad thing. It's not bad to do things by yourself. But sometimes with other projects, I'm like, well, I need other people to do this. And it feels weird having to rely on other people. And sometimes I have to just let it go. In certain projects, that's kind of what I have to force myself to do, because I'm like, oh, I could just do this, but that's not the point of the project for just me to do it. And so that teamwork aspect and learning how to work with a team is just something I love about Flow, and I can very much appreciate that as an independent artist or creative myself. And just, I know that feeling. Okay, maybe you know that feeling too. So why is it so impressive that this picture specifically won a Best Animated Feature at the Golden Globes? There were tons of good animated movies in 2024. We had Inside Out, we had The Wild Robot, we had Transformers 1. there was Moana 2, which I never saw, but I heard mixed things on. But it's an industry property, so of course it was going to be in the running at least. But why was this one specifically so loved, and why was it won? Why did it win? One, I do think it's because it like kind of transcends the language barrier, which once again, it's a reflection of its team. Because you're telling the story of teamwork, but also you're transcending boundaries, because this, I believe, the team, parts of them were working in Latvia, some were in like France and other areas around Europe, so not all of them were in the rooms next to each other. So once again, like having to push beyond the physical boundary, crazy. You have to push beyond language boundary, which is also wild, but you also have to be able to do that with your audience. And to really do that, not having dialogue is a great way to go. You can connect a story with someone who speaks Chinese, with someone who speaks English, with someone who speaks Russian, German, French, whatever language it is. If you don't have dialogue in the movie that is in a language and it's just animals, you can connect with anybody you want. So people don't have that boundary when it comes to understanding the story of Flow. So that's one aspect that I think has kind of pushed it for being so good, as well as the workflow boundaries. I've been saying boundaries a lot in this section, but having it used a free software. I mentioned this earlier. It used a free software called Blender, which is a 3D software, open source. Anybody can download it. Anybody can do anything with it. And there's a lot you can do with it, which is really cool, because that does a lot to connect with people, especially independent teams, because it's very often that as an independent artist, you'll look at something that's on the big screen and be like, wow, I would love to make something like that, but I might not get there. This movie changes how people can think about that. It has been kind of shifting in the recent years towards this kind of mindset where anybody can make something good that people everywhere, worldwide, can enjoy. It doesn't just have to be the big studios. You don't have to have millions upon millions of dollars to produce something that's quality work that people will want to watch. It doesn't have to be like that. And this movie is a representation of that. Blender, for example, has kind of made some appearances in recent movies. Say Across the Spider-Verse, they were using the grease pencil asset. I believe the Lego segments were animated in Blender because of the kid that made it. That was the software he had available, and they still look awesome for that movie. You have Everything Everywhere All at Once, which I'm amazed I haven't talked about on the series yet. I will probably do that at some point. Their like everything donut was made in Blender, I found out, which is hilarious. Which, if you've ever tried Blender, whether you're a creative or not, or you've heard of it, you probably know of the infamous donut tutorial, so that makes a lot of sense. If they were going to use Blender in that, you might want to hint at that first thing you're ever going to do. But regardless, this free software is something that anybody can use. And so something like that being on a huge international stage that people are now aware of is mind-boggling. We can be like, wow, we should start thinking more about the smaller teams. It doesn't have to just be Disney or DreamWorks or Universal or Illumination or whatever, even though they can and have and will continue to make good movies because they have money to throw at them. But money isn't everything. You can have the small teams with so much less money, and it's not even just like this. I think this one still had a budget of a few million. I couldn't tell you exactly how much, but think of the YouTube animation community where people are making things left and right for no money whatsoever. They are doing it for the love of the game. That stuff is now being recognized on bigger and bigger levels. You're seeing more independent creators come up with independent series, being able to make money from them and push their art forwards. That is an exciting thing that you can now start to see on a worldwide stage. That, I think, is what makes Flow so impactful. It's because it is decades of culmination of independence in creativity that is now being recognized beyond monetary value. And I think that's what makes it so good. I think its story, its theme behind it, its ingenuity of the creatives behind it, that's what made Flow so good. And that's why I think if you haven't watched it, God, I hope I sold you with this video. You should go watch it right now because it's just, it's so good. I know you have to rent it. It's not currently available for any streaming like included. You do have to rent it or you buy it on one of those platforms. I would recommend that you do one of the others. It is great. I think it is fun. It's interesting. It's kind of thought-provoking, and hopefully like giving you some of the details behind it makes you more intrigued because you can like think about the process of how it was made. I hope that works because it is good. You should go watch it. And if you do, let me know what you think down in the comments. But kind of going off that, what you think, we of course have our usual weekly rating. If you don't know our easily entertained rating scale from least to best, it goes garbage, once is fine, right mood, quotable, go to, and all day, every day. And I'm probably going to put Flow at a go to. I think just because it is a bit more simple. So like, I can't put it as an all day, every day because it's not hooking me as much. Like, it's great. It is fantastic. I know I just said all this great stuff and now it sounds like I'm downplaying it. It's fantastic. It's a go-to for me, for sure. Go watch it. Go watch it anyways. I'm not going to make an explanation why. It's a go-to. Go watch it. Make a decision for yourself as well. Anyways, that is it for this episode of Easily Entertained. If you enjoyed, please leave a like and subscribe so you can be notified of all new episodes every time they are released on every Tuesday. It's always a good time. And if you have any suggestions for future movies or TV shows that you would like to see me talk about on this series, leave a comment down below. But until next time, bye.